We all talk about 10x trades, folks. Well, we got another one for you. People were buying a ton of these calls, and guess what? It went up 10x. Bang! Pete, I know we're going to be talking about obesity and obesity drugs because one of those, not because of you.
Oh.
I wish I was as fit as Pete.
Yeah.
But
whatever.
Oh my gosh. Obesity drugs are huge. They're only going to be getting bigger. And it's not just Novo Nordisk or Bristol Myers,
or Lilly,
Jim Cramer would say.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of them. And we've got one for you, folks, that just a couple days ago was trading 100% lower, practically 100%, Pete. I mean, It's crazy how much this stock has jumped on positive phase 2. Not all the way through, but positive phase 2. But you know what? When you've got a market as big as some of the people that are going to be using it, well, you got something pretty good. Welcome to the Rebel's Edge. He is Pete Najarian. We're happy to have you here on February 27th. And we're going to dive right in, Pete, to Macro Minute. And that's why I started off with macro. Macro meaning, well, let's take a look at the broad picture here. And the broad picture is that the markets are still a little nervous ahead of what we know is the PCE number coming our way Thursday. But some parts of the market are doing really well today. And one of those parts is, like I say, obesity drugs.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll just hit on this for the macro, John. We have had more quotes from Jamie Dimon in the last 3 months than I could ever remember in any other quarter. But maybe it's for the good, and it probably is, because I probably agree with him in a lot of the things that he has said. And one of the things he's talking about, John, is expectations, and the expectations that there should be a little bit more caution probably about what's going on, the economy and everything else. And so I just kind of felt like today that was something very simple for me to just pick out and just say, hey, look, Jamie Dimon, we all look to him as one of the smarter guys out there on Wall Street in the, the banking industry and everything else. Obviously, everybody looks at the old man in Nebraska as well. But I think Jamie Dimon, some of the quotes he's had recently have been very, very interesting. And we should pay attention to the fact that it's not such a bad thing to have a little bit of caution as you're kind of approaching things within the market.
Yes, I agree. And I'm sure you'll agree, Pete, that there's a lot of interesting, fantastic futures today.
Fantastic futures.
Indeed. Yeah, and I'm saying, Pete, we could have picked a bunch. We each pick them. We don't discuss them ahead of time. I'm saying soybeans, Pete, and I'm saying it because if you look at the charts, this is normally when we see soybeans start to move up, Pete, and start to go from, on the chart higher and higher. And they usually peak around June, end of June or so. And that's because that's the growing season, of course, between now when they get planted and when they come out of the ground. So I'm going to say soybeans, Pete, but I'm guessing you have another instead.
Well, I like that one, John. We've talked about just about everything. And, I think there's so many different things that we should be watching closely. We talked about cocoa. We've talked about, sugar. We've talked about coffee. We've talked about all these things. I'm going to go right back to the biggest and baddest of them all. I'm going to go to crude oil. And this is why. When you look at it, where we started in February, right? About $71 a barrel. Here we are now pressing right up against that $79 a barrel. We all probably expected it to have just gone there and been gone and even higher, John, but it hasn't. It's gone up to 77, 78, kind of pulls back a little bit. But this particular run has been a little bit more interesting, I think, in February. And I wouldn't be surprised at all. Matter of fact, I'd be surprised if we don't see it somewhere in the 80s as we approach into March. So that's sort of the call that I've got right now. We're seeing a little bit more activity on the unusual side, certainly over in the energy space as well. So I think that's part of why we are seeing that. I think others are starting to say, look, at some point, crude's getting over 80, and that might be coming pretty soon.
It wouldn't be a shocker to anybody, Pete, because we always talk about the 4th of July being the peak of summer driving season as far as prices frequently. But they can get disrupted by the Houthi rebels or some explosions in the Gulf or explosions here at home, or sometimes even cleaning a refinery causes things to get shut down for a while. So we'll keep an eye on it, folks. Don't worry. All right, let's dive into the Vikings, Pete. And I don't mean your Minnesota Vikings. I mean Viking Therapeutics, because, again, obesity drugs are massive. You know, we could all make jokes about it, but the simple truth is that people that are on these obesity drugs are less likely to be heading down the path towards diabetes, which costs a fortune once people get it. And, you know, in order to basically get them all the insulin and everything else, all the medical care, they end up needing kidney transplants and all kinds of things. But obesity drugs have absolutely skyrocketed, Pete. And yes, Bristol Myers, Novo Nordisk, and Viking Therapeutics, because this is the one that had those positive results from phase 2 trials, Pete. And we had unusual activity. We had unusual activity on Valentine's Day, which is February 14th. There you see it, top of your screen, highlighted in yellow. VKTX, they were buying the March 44 calls with that stock trading at under $34. Well, take a look at where it went. And that's not the whole story, because an hour later, it was up 100%, not just 66%. And that's the stock. The options exploding higher. They went all the way through $35 today, Pete. So if you paid $340, folks, and they go to $34, that is a 10x trade. So that's what we're talking about here, a pure 10x trade. You put, for instance, $3,400 in, it's worth $34,000. How do you get trades like that? You follow what we're doing at Market Rebellion, and you subscribe by going to marketrebellion.com/get started.
Yep. It is amazing, John, this particular one, and they're in the right spot, right? I mean, we talk about things like this all the time. You look at groupings, you look at AI. Well, anybody in the world near AI has absolutely had themselves at least looked at a different way, and oftentimes people buying, right? And we've been seeing that time and time again. Pharmaceutical industry right now, the AI of that area is weight loss drugs. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. You do look at the price of Lilly at some point in time. Just take a look at that one sometime, John. You'll look at a PE, used to be somewhere, call it between 17 and 22. Now looking for something probably a little closer to somewhere between 60 and 80 on the PE side of things. So, you know, that just shows you how people are reacting to these weight loss drugs. There is monster shorts within Viking as well. You look at these numbers, they're great numbers, absolutely spectacular numbers. But let's also remember not to throw water on this fire, but this is phase 2. And we always try to make sure that everybody understands how the process works. The drug is not for sale right now. They still have to go through phase 3, and then they've got to go through that whole process where they've got to get the approval. So this will take a little bit of time, and there could be a stumble somewhere along the line between now and then. And I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just trying to point out the facts, because this is exactly what the process is. This is how it goes. They've done everything right so far. The numbers that they put up were extraordinarily good. When you look at the primary numbers they were looking at, as well as some of the others, this was great. And that's why I think people are so excited. I'd be excited too. The guys who are not excited, John, is those that are about 10 to 12% short on this stock as it's made this move today. They ain't smiling at all.
No, those folks are being carried out feet first, Pete, because like I say, the stock was up 100% today, folks. Stocks can rarely drop 100%, but occasionally on great news like this, they can go up 100%, which means it doubled from last night to today. Wow. All right, Hyns, another stock that's seeing a lot of love, Pete. And these guys reported earnings of a penny a share instead of a loss of 2 cents. Now, they're a relatively new, company, if you will. But basically what they do, Pete, is deliver all manner of therapeutic products, from erectile dysfunction drugs to hair growing things like minoxidil and so forth. And on the men's side, Cialis and Viagra and all that kind of stuff. Well, they do it, of course, through online. So you don't have to go into the office. So there's not that embarrassment factor, I guess, Pete. And a lot of people like this. And a lot of people have signed up. They're growing like a weed. And that's why the stock is exploding to the upside today.
Yeah, the last I looked, it was up over 30%. Could be less, could be more. I'm not sure where it is right now. These things do move around a lot, as we both know, throughout the day. But there's about an 8 or a 9% short here. Those guys are getting squeezed for sure to the upside right now, John. But the reality is this. The revenue growth of 57% year over year, that's pretty daggone impressive. Then you look over at some of the subscriber growth, 48% year over year. Everything is moving in the right directions. And the fact that you just pointed out the most important one, they're already getting themselves into that position. It's a younger company, but they're profitable. And that is obviously everybody's goal. You want to get to that level. They had a surprise profit, as a matter of fact. Gross margins, by the way, those are up from 79%, which is nothing to sneeze at, to 83%. So on almost every single metric you want to look at right now for Hyns, you can understand why. By the way, it's Hyns and hers, but Hyns right now absolutely just rocketing to the upside. Nice big move and plenty of option activity in there as well today. So on top of the move, we're seeing even more options flow in, looking for that stock to maybe go even a little bit higher, John.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all. This is, like I say, telemedicine, if you want to call it that, Pete, is extremely popular because not everybody is close to a doctor where they could go in and get these various treatments. And it's certainly extremely convenient. And as I say, probably a little bit of that embarrassment factor as well in the certain things. I'll let your imaginations run with that, folks. All right. Let's talk, Pete, about what's going on with Zoom video communications. This one down 33% in the past year. And we know that this is a pandemic stock, right? One of those that when people were all doing remote work, which a lot of folks still are, several days a week, but it's not total lockdown like it was when these guys skyrocketed. Well, they actually did, though, come up with some pretty good numbers this time, Pete, and they gave a very positive outlook, which means that maybe it did bottom after dropping these 30-some-odd% in the past year. It's up about 7.5% now, easing a little bit from the highs of the day, but certainly looking a lot more like they're going to survive and thrive rather than, they're like Peloton. They're just going away.
Yeah, and when you look at what their Q1 looks like, John, their outlook there, really, really strong. 118 to 120, they're looking for 115. But what really impresses me about this company, more so than almost anything, I'm looking at the balance sheet today and I go, wow, they've got $7 billion in cash and they got free cash flow of $600 million, John, with virtually very small amount of debt. So it doesn't even count. And the PE of this stock, when you look at PEs, you're talking about price to earnings, and that's a good measurement of stocks to see what their valuation looks like and so forth. Anyway, 13. There aren't a whole lot of stocks out there that aren't like somewhere in the, different parts of the market that are pretty boring. You usually see this. This is not a boring stock. This is a stock that tends to get some great moves. So I think they had a great quarter this past quarter, but looking forward even looks a little bit better. So I think this is a company that's on the rise, should be pretty interesting. Oh, and by the way, like everybody else, when they want to really get you, $1.5 billion buyback in the works as well. So that says a lot about where they think they are, the cash that they've got, and what they can do with that cash. That's going to be big for them, I think, this next year.
Yep. Very shrewd of them to hold on to that much cash, Pete, so that they can make decisions like that, because not everybody in their position, especially after the pandemic, Peloton, was in that position. They might have spent it like drunken sailors on Super Bowl ads and all kinds of things, but Zoom, I think, is a survivor. All right, last one, Pete, Unity Software. So basically down hard in the early going. It has come more than 10% off. It was, I guess, Pete, down around 27. It's back up over 30. They basically said fourth quarter revenue increased. That went up by 35%. So that's a pretty good jump to 600 mil. Maybe some people were sort of taking that into consideration on this bounce back, Pete, because the numbers didn't really say to me that the stock should be down as hard as it was.
The only reason I think it was, though, John, is this. When you look at the earnings, they were expecting 42 cents. They put up a 0.66 loss. That's kind of ugly. When you look at that one, you go, well, that might be a problem going forward. The revenue, yeah, that was a little bit of a miss, but not too terrible. I'm just looking at some of the other things on there, John, that did bother me a little bit. They are, like everybody else, they're having to cut jobs. That's the other question is what happens with all these companies, specifically tech companies, seem to have just had enormous amount of capturing folks to work for them, the labor side of things. But then they've been really having to shrink that down, John, over the last 2-3 years, post-pandemic specifically. But you take a look, it really started with Meta. Then you start looking at other names in the tech space, but even other names like this name, Unity Software, they're having to cut back. So there are some cutbacks going. That will help them probably going forward, but the efficiencies are going to be something that's going to be very, very interesting to watch. I think that they've got some numbers that could be reachable, but I think that's what people are sort of struggling with right now is, will they be able to reach some of the numbers that they're talking about right now? And I think that's a bit of a problem.
It can be. Like you say, Pete, especially with the focus on tech stocks because of AI and so forth, Unity is one of those stocks that people look at and say, should I have my money in that? Or should I really be going heavier in ARM Holdings or in Super Microcomputer or in any of these plays that are sort of NVIDIA spin-offs, even though they're not spun off from the company? NVIDIA has made investments in some of these AI stocks, and that speaks volumes too. All right, time for a little Red Zone Sports, Pete. What do you got?
Do you have another one of your tapes? I think you do.
Oh, yeah, we do. We got the Tennessee quarterback, your guy Milton.
He's a stud, man. That's a big son of a gun.
Let's take a look and a listen.
To me, the guy that's so impressive is Joe Milton. I'd take a flyer on that guy. He's 6'5", 6'6", 235. He's got a huge arm. This guy can throw the ball like 100 yards in the air, but then he can also throw it on the run. He runs a 4.6. He's a big-time athlete. Now, he's moved around. He was at Michigan. He transferred to Tennessee. But this guy can throw the deep out from the far hash and just stick it in there like nobody ever has. I mean, this is one of the great arms of the game.
And he played 9 games through 10 CDs and had no picks in 2022. And then in 23, he threw 20 TDs for 5 picks for 2,800 yards, 64% completion rating. I mean, if you want a quarterback where the secondary has to cover literally every blade of grass, this kid is a threat just being on the field.
Yeah.
And John, he's likable. He's great. He's got the stature. He's got a lot of things that I think it's not Josh Allen, but he's got size. He's got speed. He can run the ball. The only thing I question is this, John. So these guys are talking about all those things, and that's what Combine's all about, and that's this week, right? And then we've got all the different groupings are going to be out on the field soon doing their thing. But I think the interesting thing is when you look at the big games, so against Georgia, no touchdowns, no interceptions. That's you kind of scratch your head a little on that one. Missouri, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Bama, he played pretty well. He had 2 touchdowns against Bama. But you just wonder when you go up against the real competition of the group that you're with, right? The SEC in this case, you've got to perform. And if you can't perform there, you wonder about the NFL, don't you? I mean, that does become a question. So I think this kid's great, though. I think he's athletic. I don't care that he can throw the ball 100 yards. I want him to be able to throw the ball 30 yards on target, right? And get it to my receivers. That's really what you're looking for. You want a strong arm, but it doesn't matter if you can throw the ball like that. But I think he's one of the freaks that because of what he shows you at the Combine, I think he's going to show you the fact that he athletically might be the most athletic of all the quarterbacks that we're going to see. So that I think will be pretty cool. So I wanted to run into that and just give you a couple of them, and you and I can go back and forth. So here's some of the picks that I've got that I think will be freak shows here at the Combine, John. Braylon Allen. So this kid's been at Wisconsin. He's been unbelievable. He's plus 240 pounds. They estimate he might be as much as 245 or 50 in the Senior Bowl. But this guy, John, is looking to run sub 4.5. Now, that's pretty amazing, especially at that size. There's only been 3 running backs that are over 240 pounds who have ever run under the 4.6 levels. Derrick Henry, we got Fournette, and A.J. Dillon. So this guy's going to be in that sort of a category because of his speed, his ability, and everything that anybody who ever watched him at Wisconsin. Do you think that he could be a really good player at the NFL level, John, or is he a little bit overrated maybe? What do you think about him?
I don't think overrated when I think of him, Pete. I think that the kid's going to play at this next level. And, you know, obviously at the Combine, there are going to be some people that put up fabulous workouts, and there are going to be some people who just reinforce what we already know are tremendous talent on the football field. Because as Pete says all the time, folks, it ain't about, you know, you doing 38 reps with 225. It's how did you do, like Pete just said, against Georgia if you're Tennessee, or against Missouri, when you're up against competition that is at a par or better than you. It's one thing if you're beating up on the little sisters of the poor, but if you're playing one of the best teams in the nation, and both those two teams I just mentioned are two of the best teams in the nation, nobody wanted to see Georgia on the schedule, Pete, and nobody wanted Missouri because that team was loaded.
Yeah.
But I'll say this, as far as a guy that brings it, Pete, I want to see this Brian Murphy from Texas.
Yeah.
Because this guy will run faster than some linebackers. Not flat out, he's not going to be the fastest guy, but he's going to be at 4.7 or faster. He's going to do the cone drill at some unbelievable speeds and so forth. And all he did was just disrupt every backfield that he ever got into, Pete. And he gets into a lot. So that guy, watch him. Defensive tackle out of Texas, Brian Murphy. I think that guy is going to be a freak show. And, you know, the kids from Georgia that they put out, Carter and some of those guys, I think he's going to be mentioned in the same breath as those guys, Pete.
And he should be, because he is everything you just said. I mean, that defensive line at Texas was unreal. By the way, they had a wide receiver there, Xavier Worthy. He's the one guy in the Combine that they say is very, very likely to run in the 4.2s. So that'll be something fun to watch. Wide receiver. He's really small, but I tell you, he shows up in every single game and had a really, really great year this past year. I got one last guy that you and I probably have both seen in person before, John, but Cam Hart. Now, he's a name. He's a cornerback for Notre Dame. 6'3", 210-pound cornerback for Notre Dame. He can run like a deer. People can't wait to see what he can do at the Combine for his 40 time, but he's also just a heck of a corner. And what I like about that, John, is in this game that we've got in football these days, you've got the wide receivers that are 6'3", 6'4", 6'6", and then you've got the wide receivers that are little guys, the 5'10", 6'2" guys, right? So it's a much different corner. But if you've got a corner who can go toe-to-toe with these guys who's 6'3", which is rare, but if you can get them, those are the guys that you can put on those big guys and have a little bit better shot. Because when it's all said and done, that physical side of some of these receivers is absolutely incredible. The size of some of these receivers. I mean, a great example of that would be Mike Evans, right? I mean, he's 6'5", 230-pound wide receiver. And then all you got to do is look out to Seattle, see another big guy. And then look to the Bears. You got another one. You go to Cincinnati, there's another one. There's big receivers everywhere, and you've got to be able to defend them. If you've got a nice big corner, I think Cam Hart's one of these guys who, from the Combine, he'll go higher, but he deserves it anyway just because his size makes him that much more interesting and his ability. And he did a great job at Notre Dame in the past year. So I think he'd be a fun one to watch as well.
Pete, I'd say just to throw one out there, because this is a guy after Pete's own heart. Pete was God, what did you hold, Pete, for like 20, 25 years, the tackling record at the University of Minnesota?
Yeah.
And I forget what your high season was, but there's a kid named Peyton Wilson at North Carolina, Pete, the North Carolina State, rather, the Wolfpack, not the Tar Heels. And this kid, 6'4", 235 or something like that, Pete, he put up over 138 tackles his senior year. And the kid's a freak show physically. So that guy might be the closest I've seen to Luke Kuechly, Pete.
Yep.
And he won the Bernardrick Award this year. And that's a guy you want to watch and see how he does at the combine as well.
Yep, I think you're right. By the way, I'll slip it in there. 144. Anyway.
144. Nice. 6 more than this guy.
I just had to throw that in there. Anyway, all right. Hey, John, let's jump to one other thing that's kind of interesting, I think, right now, because we talk about free agency. This ties into that, the combine, all of that. The Buccaneers. Now, I can't quite figure them out right now, John, and they could be going a different direction than I thought. But are they flushing a toilet right now, or are they saying, hey, some of these guys are going to get this, you can have a franchise tag, you can maybe still negotiate with somebody, but we'll see how it goes. But right now, John, here's the free agents for the Buccaneers, and you tell me if this doesn't pull this team apart. Mike Evans, the wide receiver, right? Yeah, Mike Evans, we all know that. So he's likely to play somewhere else. Doesn't mean he has to, but he's likely. He's a free agent. You've got 3 linebackers that are all now free agents, all 3 starters. Devin White, Levante Howard, and Shaq Barrett. All 3 are free agents, could leave the Buccaneers. Their safety, Antoine Winfield, played at the University of Minnesota. His dad played in the NFL for a long time. He is a free agent. Baker Mayfield, free agent. The kicker, McLaughlin, free agent. The D-line, 2 of them, Golston and Gaines, free agents. I'll tell you, there's a lot of holes to fill. And with the new salary cap that we talked about yesterday, they've got more money than they had. And I would be shocked if all of these guys leave. I don't think they all will. But right now, they're all free agents, and that is a possibility. But of course, we'll know a lot more when we get into March, and then that's when we start to see the free agency market. But that's going to change things, John, and it's going to make it really, really interesting to see, because if Baker Mayfield, for instance, Kirk Cousins leaves, a lot of people in Minnesota think, hey, we want Baker Mayfield. So he's gone. Mike Evans maybe goes somewhere, right? He's gone. The next thing you know, I'm not sure where the Buccaneers end up, but they are going to be a very youthful team, I'll say that.
Yeah, well, it sounds like they're going to be really open both to being picked over free agent-wise and being a picker free agent-wise, Pete. So I guess it goes both ways. And maybe if they weren't happy, I mean, Baker took them, to the verge of things they hadn't seen there in a long time, Pete. Playoff football ain't something that's been synonymous with Tampa Bay, except for that one season with our guy, Tom Brady, TB12. But my gosh, this is rolling the dice down there. So whoever their general manager is, Pete, he is a gambling man.
He is. And like I said, some of these guys easily could return. Baker Mayfield's already said, hey, I want to play with the Bucs, but he ain't going to play for $5 million, which is what he played for last year, John. So it's going to be interesting. And that number's probably got a 3 in front of it. He might be in the 30 million category, I think. And I'm not sure whether Tampa wants him at that level or not, but that's probably going to be the going rate for a guy like him. It should be interesting.
Yeah. And like we discussed yesterday, Pete, they could load him up with incentives too. They could give him 20 or 22 and give him 10 million worth of incentives. They've got 74 million per team to give in incentives. Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us, folks. Remember, go to marketrebellion.com/get started, and you could be trading like us. You could be seeing that unusual activity if you subscribe to our unusual option activity, or UOA. You could also pick up some great tips from our coaches and mentors if you need some education. So go to marketrebellion.com/get started, and we will see you tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time.